Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about the selector that we all have access to, and specifically which animuses you should be taking a look at. And without further ado, let's get into it. Now, to start, let's set some ground rules and the foundation essentially of this selector. First and foremost, there are 16 options for the selector, but in reality you should really only consider 15. Now, in addition to this, while there really aren't any bad or unusable units in the game, I do want to include a disclaimer here for specifically for debuffers if you choose them with this selector. Now, first, we do have the fact, or it is objective, that we do get a free unit that counters all debuffers, as well as the fact that the speed set in this game, which by the way is also one of the most popular sets, has an immunity option, and this does affect things by quite a bit. In truth, again, this will affect specifically who you end up choosing from the selector by a non-ignorable amount. And in addition to this, players gain access to Freya pretty reliably through the pulls we get from story farming. So with all this, debuffers have even more things to consider if you choose them as your, well, selector choice. Now, with this as well, this does mean that most debuffers feel like the less viable option to consider, especially as a starter unit for new accounts when looking at both PvE and PvP content. But keep in mind that while all of this is the case, it does not mean that debuffers are weak or unusable, as when these characters are used properly, and especially in things like PvP, they can perform amazingly in the correct situation, as I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar, especially if you come from PvP games like Summoner's War or Epic 7. As a final disclaimer, you are more than welcome to choose whoever you'd like from this selector, but these are of course my thoughts when it comes to the following units and their potential use cases. Now, in addition to this, before we get into the actual tier list itself, I have some initial thoughts about the overall cast. First, it is recommended, and the reason why I said that there are technically 16 but more like 15 options that you have access to. One of the first things I'd recommend you not choose from this list is Ling Luo, since she is free after the 7-day commission event, and with her kit specifically, she provides a lot of heals and immunity with her S3, but other than this, she does lack utility for the team compared to other options. That said, she is still powerful, but regardless of how you see her in terms of viability or strength, it doesn't really make sense to take her with this selector. In addition to this, however, though certain characters will be strong or amazing, and as I'm sure you guys have seen from different websites or from word of mouth about the strength of certain characters, just because certain characters are strong or amazing in certain content or certain game modes, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the end all be all or must haves. The reason for this is because there are so many different modes to consider for Etheria restart, and as a result, well, that's the point of today's video, which is using this as our foundation. We're going to break down each character and see what you can or should consider before you choose your character from the selector list. Now, the first characters we're going to start with are from the S tier. Let's start with Tiamat. Now, specifically with Tiamat, she is the best tank in the game currently, and she's incredible for both herself and her team in terms of sustain. She heals over time, she has a shield and built-in Aureus or damage share, if this is unfamiliar to you non-Epic 7 players. But in addition to this, her AoE taunt as well as damage dealing capabilities is pretty unmatched as of right now. Now, in addition to this, when she has her passive activated, she takes turns and deals massive AoE damage, and overall, this character is just kind of the GOAT. Now, there are a few weaknesses for Tiamat specifically, and that is the fact that she consumes her own HP for a lot of her abilities. So using your skill at a bad time might end up hurting you or causing you to lose her, which can be very difficult or can be quite bad if you aren't familiar with or are just auto playing through the game, especially if you don't take a healer or some other sustain. The next character I want to talk about is Beontin, and this character specifically is honestly amazing. She has a lot of utility in her kit, has lots of turn pushing or turn meter increases. She's got skill cooldown reduction, attack and crit damage buffs, and a passive that revives dead allies, which, as you would imagine, makes her incredible for PvP, but can be also quite useful even for PvE content as well. Now, in terms of this, she obviously remains or should I guess, deserve a spot in the S tier of this list. However, now we need to talk about Ling Luo, who, as you guys are probably familiar with, as I just mentioned, is a character who, despite being quite good, is not really someone that's worth pulling for. The reason for this is, well, plain and simple, this character is just free, and despite her again having decent amounts of heal, the immunities, and honestly having easy counter, or being an easy counter to a lot of the cast, since there's a lot of debuffs in most of the kits, she's just not really going to be worth pulling for, especially since dupes or constellations or sequences, whatever you want to call it, aren't accessible or activatable in PvE. With this, I'm going to leave her in this little category that I'll name do not pick. Okay, in any case, the next character that we should talk about is Rosa. Now, Rosa is very, very powerful. Her kit does also revolve around debuffing the enemy and dealing lots of follow-up attacks. And as you would imagine, this makes her very good in content that she isn't weak to in terms of, ability, or in terms of element or attribute. Weakness wise, and as a result, she is again very powerful and very strong in all content except for Terra Matan. To be clear, her damage is quite significant. However, from what's understood and known about Rosa right now, it does require a bit more investment to make her work, so do with this what you will. Next, we have Chloros, who is the first character that we'll talk about from the A tier. This character is definitely more PvP focused. He has good single target damage for PvE, and overall, because of his execution and / extinction on S3, which is that, units killed by his S3 cannot revive, it makes him a very honestly usable and even great option against characters who can revive. And if you're familiar with extinction characters in Epic 7, you know exactly why this is such a valuable passive. In addition to this, his S3 damage increases every time it's used, and the rest of his kit is otherwise just a bunch of more damage. Now, it is worth noting that he does get outperformed by other DPS options in PvE outside of Terra Matan, as there are lots of AoE requirements or necessities in PvE specifically, but otherwise still a solid option to the cast. In addition to this, now we have Born. Man, honestly, some of the names are gonna get at me, but this is a reliable stripper with honestly pretty decent stats in terms of his speed, and he's one of the best units to contest Ling Luo's turn 1 immunity with, as honestly, you do need something, or you do need a way to deal with immunities in general if you are trying to debuff or handle, well, someone like her specifically. Now, in addition to this, she is, or I should say, Born is a character that isn't able to crit, so you want to be as fast as possible and bulky too whenever also possible, I suppose. But this unit as a whole is just a must for those who want to counter fast Ling Luos when playing a debuffer team, and as a result, if you are someone that's using someone like Born, he is a great enabler, and in most cases, some of the B tier debuffers can even rise to the A or S ranks, specifically if you're pairing them with Born. This does feel quite similar to how, again, if you are someone that plays Epic 7, and apologies, as well, Epic 7's where I have my most of my experience, Born does feel like a character like current Firelitica, or even characters like Peyra or the Rands of the past, where though some other characters like Summertime Etheria or other debuffers were okay prior to an opener or a stripper's release, after a more reliable or a more powerful character like Born was released, they certainly shoot up in terms of viability and strength. Now, in terms of the next character, we have the hot redhead of the male husbandos. That's going to be Helki, or Helkid, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the thing is, for this character, honestly, it is a bit debatable about whether or not how good or how impactful he is. I've actually seen a lot of people argue for and against his placement. Some people argue that he's much stronger than where he honestly is placed in some tier lists, but in terms of just value, Helkid is very, very focused or fixated around applying debuffs enhanced by his barrier, but of course he gets this through his S3 or his skill 3, which is honestly, or which makes him honestly a decent option for story and general content, but does kind of make him a bit more vulnerable or weak towards enemies that can't be stunned. However, in general, this does still make him overall quite usable in most PvE content, though again, there is a clear distinction, I would say, between Hellkid and some of the other characters on this list, especially those in the S ranks. The next character we have is Tsukuyomi, and this is another character that belongs in the A tier. Now, to be clear, this is a defense scaling unit who does have good CR push and buffing on her S3 for both herself and the team. However, while she's pretty good at many things, she truly doesn't feel like a perfectly niche or a specialized character for anything or any one specific piece of content. And as a result, it does feel a little bit weird, I'd say, even for a kit, especially since it feels like her kit conflicts with itself quite a bit, where despite she herself scaling off of defense, she gives an attack buff to herself and the team, which again does kind of make her feel a bit confusing or confused in terms of her role or her niche. Now, in addition to this, anything that really she does specifically, it feels like someone else can be done, or it feels like someone else can do in a more specialized or niche situation, which does feel like the name of the game when it comes to Etheria Restart. But overall, I consider it to be a good option for tank down teams that can definitely go crazy with counter set. And if you're, again, someone that has played games like Summoner's War or Epic 7, you know how annoying counter set characters like this can be. However, overall, this does kind of obviously lean her into a more PvP focused unit that does have some usable cases in PvE. The next character I want to talk about is Lilith, and she is another character that belongs in the A tier. She is honestly one of the best debuff focused damage dealers if she's uncontested, as this character can be absolutely ridiculous in terms of PvP with her bombs. And overall, the way that it felt when I played her specifically was similar to debuffers like Summertime Etheria from Epic 7. Again, apologies for references specifically to that game, but as Etheria Restart is so new, it just feels like a lot of the damage or the kits feel similar to other PvP focused gachas. That said, again, having the overall debuff damage from Lilith specifically makes her quite funny, honestly, even to see damage wise. But in addition to this, she has a 20% chance to get an extra turn with her basic attack. And to be truthful, or to be completely transparent, this is definitely going to be a character that will feel like one of the most powerful or overwhelming PvP units in the game, honestly, if there's no cleanses or immunities on the enemy team. But overall, in addition to just the PvP focus that she has, she is also a very good unit for Doki Doki farming, if that's something that you're also interested in. Now, in addition to this, we should also talk about Real Mocha. Now, Real Mocha is an AoE DPS, and for a lot of characters, honestly, just having this, or for a lot of teams, just having Real Mocha as a pretty solid option for PvE content makes her worth pulling for, or worth using or building if you have her. Though it is also worth mentioning that she does have some self-sustain on her S2. Now, next we have Rahu, and Rahu is honestly a character that is probably most affectionate, or probably will be most comfortable for those of you that are familiar with a slower, more tanky and bruisery playstyle. Rahu specifically has a bunch of defense scaling, has a defense buff for all allies, and also gains up to a 30% final damage increase. But as you could probably imagine with some of these playstyles and a lot of Rahu's kit, this is mostly a character fixated on PvP. The last character that we have for the A tier is actually Mia, and the thing about Mia is that honestly, though, or before we get to the B tier rather, Mia is the last character of the A tier, and Mia, with her sustained heals and shields, in addition to her reliable dispel on S2 and being the only AoE in the cleanse, or AoE cleanse in the game, if Ling Luo basically wasn't free, makes her a solid choice, especially from the sustain or the support role specifically. But as always, whether or not you want to pull for this character when we do get someone like Ling Luo in the game is quite debatable. Now, before we get into the B tier, I do want to kind of explain why some of these characters are, again, not in the A tier or not in the S tier, and that's specifically because these B tier characters are located in this specific category because they're limited uses in PvE, and they're otherwise decent or good usage in other content, but overall lacking versatility or diversity in their general use cases. Now, again, effectively what I'm saying here is that though these characters may be great for one piece of content, the fact that they aren't usable in more than one piece of content, they're not flexible in content like PvP while also being good at PvE, does kind of cloud or, you know, muddy their role in general. And with that, there inevitably are going to be characters that feel a little bit worse or feel a bit weaker overall. The first character we have to talk about with that is Zenyatta. And honestly, despite her being, again, a decent character in PvE with an AoE defense break and some self buffs as well as a dispel on her S1, she is, I guess, like one of the better characters to farm Doki Doki with, again, for speed set. But overall, part of the reason why she feels a bit more niche or weak is because it does take quite a bit to ramp up her S2 passive, which as a result basically locks her in Doki Doki content or Doki Doki farming, which though is powerful or though can be very powerful or useful for that specific use case, does not make her very powerful or overall appealing for any other content, including, again, well, even PvP or even the campaign or in other content, including the ones that I just mentioned. Next, we have Klaus, and Klaus is also an AoE defense breaker with some CR push capabilities, though basically she shares a similar case as the debuffers, which is that it feels like she is good if she's uncontested, but otherwise the kit does feel a bit punishable or weak if she can't debuff in PvP. Now, in regards to her specifically, she does have pretty good base speed and is a good opener for defense breaking, but as a result, she is effectively just locked currently behind Doki Doki and Terramaton farm, though not nearly as impactful or insane in PvP for the exact reasons that you likely wouldn't be able to use other debuffers, as mentioned previously. Next, we have Celine, or I believe her name is Celine. Let me just double check real quick. It's... yes, Celine's. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I didn't typo this. Celine's. We have Celine's also here in the B tier. Her main mechanic is applying as many, or honestly applying a ridiculous amount of debuffs, and the forgetfulness debuff that she has specifically denies enemies passive abilities, which again feels very, very similar to, or in theory should be powerful, similar to a character like Knockwall or even some of the other powerful debuffers in Epic 7. But in addition to this, she also has a team shield that goes away after she takes her next turn, or takes away her next turn. Now, the thing is, truthfully, her high base HP is countered by cleanses and immunity set, or overall, a lot of her kit is again countered by cleanses and immunity set. But in general, despite her kit and her interesting concept for PvP, there are many better options for her for most other PvP or PvE content that you'd otherwise use for her. And overall, though she can feel impactful at times, so do literally all the other characters in this list. Next, we have Veronica, though. If you are someone that has perused some of the team guides, you've likely seen Veronica for a number of reasons, but in truth, though, Veronica is quite powerful, as she is a bruiser that pushes herself up 35% every time she gets hit. She also dispels and steals enemy buffs, and she spreads them among allies. Despite all these things, including, again, also her S2 dealing decent damage on enemies and providing a shield based on her max HP, she is inevitably outclassed by Tiamat in the sustain/mitigation department. And though, again, she also does have decent dispelling, it just feels like, especially for some of the characters in this game, Veronica included, being a master of none is not nearly as, I guess, I wouldn't say viable, but nearly as necessary, especially when we have so many characters that are so specialized and so powerful in specific content or for specific reasons or use cases. Now, the main takeaways that I have for you regarding this list are the following. All the characters are honestly pretty viable for PvE content, and like I kind of mentioned earlier, despite the fact that debuffers suffer quite a bit, especially in PvP, It does feel like whether or not you should choose debuffers as one of the options from this from the selector is kind of up to you, since again you're kind of banking on enemies or players or opponents not having immunities, or using characters that have immunities, or taking characters like Linguo who have immunities, or even taking Freya. You kind of get what I'm saying. The list goes on. And because of all this, it does feel like debuffers and characters that are trying to, whether it's stun or applied defense breaks or anything like this, if their main focus is to be used in content like PvP, it feels like they suffer quite a bit more compared to the others. And in addition to this, and on the topic of Linguo, my other takeaway, or another major takeaway from this list, is that you really should be building Linguo as soon as possible, as again, she does help prevent debuffs and is really, really fantastic and high performing in PvE and PvP content. Excuse me. Next, a lot of the characters, regardless if there are debuffers or not, do have some form of debuffing or debuff in their kits just for fun, which do make characters like Linguo and Freya even more valuable. But finally, by far my top 3 choices for this list, of course, are going to be the characters in the S tier, as Tiamat, Beonten, and Rosa are easily not just the best in class for their respective categories, but also quite overall amazing picks or versatile picks through both their mitigation, utility, and DPS respectively. Again, to be clear, these 3 units are just so powerful, regardless of when or how you use them, that you can honestly use them in most content and have no issues whatsoever. Now, in terms of personal note, I do want to say that though I did give you 3 options, I would personally pick Tiamat just because Tiamat's built-in Aureus, AoE team shield, CR push, heal, AoE damage, all in one unit makes her honestly a fantastic option that carries you through a lot of content. And again, speaking candidly, having this much in one specific character's kit is just ridiculous. Now, in addition to this, I do want to say that despite Bay or Beonten being quite powerful, it is a bit, despite her being quite broken, her utility or her value can be replaced or kind of made up for by other characters. In some cases, especially if you're looking to replace her specifically, as opposed to someone like Tiamat. But finally, when it comes to Rosa, I do want to say that despite her being pretty fantastic in almost all PvE content and PvP, she's still a DPS, which means that she's likely going to be one of the first characters to get power crept. And in addition to this, we do have a free Gray, who is also a fantastic DPS. So in terms of value, having a great DPS is not necessarily the highest priority in Etheria Restart, since again, most players can clear a lot of the early content with Gray and the free Lian that of course everyone receives. That said, I do want to make the distinction that Rosa is still better than these two in all the content that they can be used. But whether or not you need a slightly or even a decently better DPS as opposed to a healer or a tank, well, that's up for your own discretion. That said, again, overall, I would definitely pick Tiamat if you haven't. But anyways, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks again for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something. If you did, make sure to check out the rest of my socials. I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Apologies for the one take Jake stutters. But yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.